I've been going through a lot of therapy recently. All through my teens, I was a weird kid. But recently, I'm turning 20 in 2 months, everything got more intense. I was having anxiety attacks, night terrors, all kinds of shit. I self-medicated myself with drugs and alcohol and cigarettes for years. But this recent spike in psychological disturbance was too much. I went to see my family doctor and got a referral to a really good psychiatrist. And I had been undergoing intense psychotherapy for almost 3 months. The weird thing is that after a few weeks, she said my symptoms weren't depression or bipolar or anything like that. She said I showed every sign of suffering from PTSD. I told her it wasn't possible because I couldn't think of any trauma bad enough in my childhood to trigger it. Well, now I think I might have been wrong. See, I could never remember my night terrors. When I had them, my parents, or the occasional boyfriend, though they never lasted, would find me screaming my lungs out and with my eyes wide open, staring into some empty corner of the room like there was something horrible there. Once they got me properly woken up and aware, I could never tell them what I'd been screaming about. Maybe it's the drugs my psych put me on, or maybe in all of our endless sessions he actually cracked open a locked door inside my head. But last night, something changed. I dreamed I was hiding in a huge pile of large, brightly colored cushions. It's the kind of thing that most kids would love to do, but for some reason I was very nervous. In the background was the faint sound of children playing, and I knew that I was meant to be out there in the playground, not in here hiding. Carefully lifting a cushion, I peered out into the room. There were rows of desks, bookshelves, a blackboard, and an open door in the corner. I was in a classroom. Above me, a handmade banner that said, "Reading Corner," was swaying softly in the breeze from the open door. I heard another door open and I froze. The door clicked shut again, and I heard soft footsteps crossing the room. And then I saw a woman walking between the desks, heading to the open door. She was slender, bordering on bony, with thick brown hair streaked with gray, tied back in a ponytail. I held my breath until she walked out of the room and pulled the door shut. I listened to her shoes clicking away on the concrete outside. As soon as the sound faded, I was on my feet and jumping free of the pile of cushions, then running to the other door. I know I was very small in this dream, because the doorknob was above my head. I reached up and grabbed the metal sphere in both hands and gave it a twist, and the door swung inward. Inside was dim, lit only by the magritte daylight spilling through a small window high on one wall. But I didn't dare turn on the light. Leaving the door open, I raced inside and looked around. It was a small room, and 3 or 4 walls were lined with what were essentially kitchen cabinets. The bottom row rested on the floor, forming a flat working space on top. Above them, fixed high on the walls, was a second row of cabinets. I was only just tall enough to see onto the flat bench if I stood on my tippy toes. The space was packed with craft supplies, books, reams of paper, and other things you would expect to be stored in the teacher's office. The wall space above the bench tops was packed with calendars and posters. Whatever I was looking for, it wasn't on the bench, so I started pulling open drawers and opening cupboards. I found bottles of poster paints, clear plastic bags full of colorful felt-off cuts, bundles of pipe cleaners and yarn, and a whole load of books. Finally, after working my way almost halfway around the room, I found what I wanted. The drawer was full of toys, chocolate and chewing gum, comics, and other contraband taken from children. My own precious treasure was resting on top. A Game Boy. Remembering it now, it was a battered piece of junk, probably more than a decade old. But in the dream, I was overjoyed to have it back. I lifted it out and slid the drawer closed, and was about to run out of the classroom when I heard a strange noise. In the dream, I jumped with fright and spun around, nearly dropping my recovered loot. There was nothing there, and there was no noise other than the faint sound of my classmates playing. I had started tiptoeing out of the room when I heard it again. A soft squeak, followed by the faint rattle of one of the cabinet doors. I was terrified and nearly sprinted out of the room, but some dreadful curiosity drew me closer. I could see that one of the doors under the sink was slightly ajar, like something slightly too big had been put away under there. and was preventing the door from fully closing. With my little heart racing, I reached out and pulled the door open. There was a woman stuffed into the cabinet under the sink. No, not just a woman. Even though she looked strange, I recognized that thick hair. Mostly brown but streaked with gray. My teacher. She had shiny, silvery-looking tape over her mouth, and when she saw me, she let out another high-pitched squeal, muffled by the tape. I was shocked when I realized she wasn't wearing clothes. The lower half of her body was hidden behind the other door, but her top half was clad only in a white bra. No, that wasn't true. In addition to the bra, she was wrapped several times with rope. I could see it was tight because it was digging deeply into her skin, raising angry red welts. She must have been nudging the door with her elbow, but she was bound so tightly she could only manage to bump it slightly, making it rattle. Her eyes were damp with tears, and I was weirdly fascinated to see that her nose was crusted with snot. It seems silly now, but in the dream it took me until this point to suddenly remember something very important. I had just seen my teacher leave the room a few minutes before. If that had been my teacher, then who was this woman under the sink? And if this woman under the sink was actually my teacher, then who... That was when I heard the classroom door open. I had been so distracted by my weird discovery that I hadn't been listening for footsteps on the concrete outside. There was a loud clunk as the door swung shut again, and then I heard the distant sound of footsteps on carpet. Quick as a flash, I jumped into the first cupboard that caught my eye, a tall one that turned out to contain hanging clothes. There was a big woolen coat hanging at one end, so I carefully closed the door behind me and ducked behind it, then willed myself not to breathe. The only light came from a thin crack between two cupboard doors. "What's going on in here?" came my teacher's voice. It was sweet and innocent and playful, and it chilled my blood. "Why is your cupboard open, you naughty girl?" There was a long pause, and I heard my teacher, the one I suspected was my real teacher, making a frightened noise behind the tape. "Oh dear," continued the other voice eventually. "I might have believed that you got the cabinet opened all by yourself." Another pause, and I heard a strange sound, a soft, slow sniffing. When the voice spoke again, it was alarmingly close, maybe right outside the cupboard I was hiding in. "However," it said, "there is no way you could have opened the door to the classroom. The vertical crack of light was bolted out by a shadow. I wonder who else is in here." I heard the sniffing again, and it was on the other side of the thin gap between the doors. I panicked. I sprinted forward, slammed the cupboard door open, and heard the meaty thud of the door striking something, followed by a grunt of pain. I only intended to burst out of the cupboard and run away, but I must have hit her right in the face with the edge of the door. I didn't pause, didn't look to see what I had done. I just ran, past the reading corner, between the rows of desks, and straight to the classroom door. As I reached up to twist the doorknob, I heard a noise from back where I'd just come, and I looked. The thing that was not really my teacher was standing in the doorway to her private office, with her hands resting on either side of the doorframe. Her usually kind face was now a scowl of hatred, and I saw a thin trickle of blood tracing a line down one side of her nose. Her eyes were not their usual dark brown, but were instead a cat-like yellowish green, and in the low light they appeared to be glowing faintly. Her mouth opened wide, like she was going to shout or scream, but all that came out was a reptilian hiss. Suddenly, she lunged forward, springing towards me at inhuman speed. I screamed, ran outside, slammed the door behind me, and then ran and ran and ran. And that's it. That's everything I can remember of my dream. I woke up, drenched in sweat, absolutely sure that something dreadful was chasing me, and it took me a minute or so for the terror to fade. That was last night. Well, this morning, about 5 a.m. I couldn't get back to sleep, so I got up early, watched some garbage TV, drank some coffee. I wanted to believe it was just a bad dream, but I couldn't get the image out of my head. When my mother woke up around 8:30, she commented on my early rising and made herself breakfast. When she was settled in front of her toast and tea, I asked about kindergarten, admitting that I had no memory of it. She rolled her eyes and said it was about the age I started to become so difficult, and bemoaned the lack of funds that forced her to send me to a public school. I asked her if she had my class photos from that year, and she said I'd been sick on photo day, so they only bought a single photo of the whole class. She added that I was sick a lot that year and missed a lot of school days. None of this sounded familiar to me. My first memories of school are from first grade. I went into the junk storage room and pulled out the cardboard box marked photos in Sharpie. It took over 20 minutes of leafing through a pile to find one I was looking for. And when I saw it, my whole skeleton turned to ice. The kids were lined up in front of the reading corner banner, and I could see a pile of cushions behind them. They were smiling on all of their faces except for one. Besides the class stood my teacher, exactly as she looked in my dream. Instead of smiling, she was looking straight into the camera with a serious look on her face. I leaned in close, and I was in no doubt. It was almost healed, but there was definitely a small mark on the side of her nose. It was a thin, vertical line.